Hello, and welcome to SG Squared. Steve Gladen, the global pastor of small groups from Saddleback Church, pulls from his over 25 years of experience to encourage and equip listeners like you to lead small group ministry. So let's listen and learn together.
Welcome to SG Squared. Steve Gladen on small groups. Derek here, along with the man of the hour, the man whose very initials stand for small groups. Give it up for Steve Gladen.
Hey guys, good to have you on this episode. We're pretty excited about this one and kind of gearing it towards some people who, probably don't have a small group ministry, but because of the title, I know that's why you're listening. So we got a great show in store for you.
And it's May now. We're getting closer and closer to summer. Have you guys gotten past the kind of the hazy season? I know they call it June gloom, right? Even up into June.
Yeah, we get May gray and then June gloom. So how they figure out this stuff, I have no idea, but it's wonderful to have beautiful weather and just, all kinds of things happening. Even though we're moving to summer, moving towards summer, there's a lot of things that are in place as we're getting ready for fall. And so many things we're gearing up for our groups to do during the summertime and just to engage with each other. So lots of things still in motion, in the midst of graduations and Mother's Day and Father's Day coming up pretty soon. There's so much in motion right now. It's just pure craziness.
Yeah, and this is the time of year where a lot of churches are thinking about small group ministry or launching a small group ministry because the fall is coming, right? Summer is almost here, but fall comes quickly after. So that's why we want to do this episode, how to start a small group ministry, so that churches can now be thinking about getting ready to do the big launch in the fall.
Yeah, it's and as you're even saying that, Derek, I know that even post COVID, here we are so many years since COVID began. Outside of it, there's still a number of churches that still haven't quite latched onto the power of how Jesus set up the New Testament with his game plan of temple courts and house to house. And so we do want to spend time on that. And as we're jumping into it, is for everyone that's listening to know we're putting in some very robust show notes. And I want to encourage you to be able to print them out and to follow along or however you want to follow with that, because we're going to blow through a lot of the points, but the details are there in the show notes, and I don't want you to miss that. And of course, we're always happy to answer questions, but this is a pivotal podcast. It may go a little bit longer, but the thing that's going to be important is that we're going to be walking you through 10 things that are super important for you to think through as you're going to start a small group ministry. And both Derek and I would tell you through the decades and decades and decades of ministry, I've got a lot more decades than on Derek. You can just tell by looking at us if you're watching on video. But the point is that these 10 things are super important for you to understand and work through as you're doing it. So we're going to kind of rifle through them as best we can, but the show notes are there so that you can pick up the pieces afterwards. And then as always, we're there to answer any questions that you'd have for us.
All right, let's dive into this. How to start a small group ministry. Number one, you want me to just go ahead and give them the big fill in the
Yeah,
blank?
just go ahead and you can read the point and I'll just kind of do the color commentary and work through that.
Number one, know where you are headed.
Yeah. And right now where you're headed is you're headed into change. And Jesus was a master at change. He talked about changing the church in Matthew 21, verse 12. He talked about changing people in Matthew 8, when, he gives three groupings of people that, were very diverse people that were not accepted in the New Testament. But he talked about how they're important and you got to change to love them. And he talked more importantly about changing your heart in Matthew 5:28. And as you're going into this change management mode, you have to understand there's this powerful phrase that says to master change, your paradigm's got to switch from what you will lose to what you will gain. And this is very important as we're talking about a small group ministry, because one of the things Saddleback Church realized is that when Jesus talked about temple courts and house to house, is that oftentimes in churches, we know that playbook, but we mess it up and we create all kinds of mini temple courts all around our church. And one of them that we had was called midweek service. We had a Sunday morning and we had a midweek Wednesday night. And although the Wednesday was important, it wasn't doing what we wanted it to do because you just can't disciple, a grouping of people that come at midweek. And so one of the things we did is we stopped midweek, we lost midweek, but then we gained small groups. And if you just want to look at the raw numbers in attendance, we had about 1,200 in midweek, but we have about 25 to 30,000 in small groups. And so again, if you get caught in change management the wrong way, you get paralyzed by what you'll lose and you'll never take change to happen. And coming out of COVID, it's in one of those times where you have this opportunity. So let me get back to where Derek was taking us, and that is you got to know where you're headed. One of the number one things in starting a small group ministry is you have to know the unit of one. You've got to know what a disciple is. So if I've got Derek right next to me here, and he is my premium disciple, what is it that he exudes and what is it that he does? Because if you don't know where you're headed in discipleship, what happens is then your small group leaders don't have a definition for success, because the job of the small group is to produce disciples. And if you don't know the unit of one, you can't replicate any more units out of that. And in the same way, your church needs to know that. Now, for us at Saddleback, we'll take the 5 verbs from the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, and that's our unit of one. We want to see those 5 verbs embedded into each individual and each small group. That is success for the small group leader. And that we want to see fellowship happen, which is having authentic community where you're able to confess temptation before you have to confess sin. We want them to work on discipleship, and that is to know cognitively what the Bible says, but also engage God's word in an active way in knowing their spiritual next step. We want to engage them in serving and being able to know that, you have a spiritual gift, and how do you take that spiritual gifting and volunteer in the church? We want to engage them in evangelism to be able to say, what's your one life? Who's the person that doesn't know Jesus that lives close to you so that you can be that light to them? And then understanding worship. How do you surrender and sacrifice more? All of these things got to be introduced inside of your small group ministry, but you've got to be able to identify that first so that they know what success is. Because without that success, then you're not going to be able to help them understand where they're trying to build and where they're trying to go. So the number one thing is you've got to know where you're headed.
Well said. Know where you're headed. On to number 2. If you're taking notes, and reminder, like Steve said, click the link in the show notes to see the detailed breakdown of all these. We've got all the scriptures attached and some other key bullet points under each point. But number 2 is find the lay of the land in your church. Steve, break that down for us.
So once you've decided that you want to do a small group ministry and you know what you spent the time with your church leadership trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to produce as a disciple, then once you know where you're headed, you can start doing, what we call getting the lay of the land. And this is where in any change management, you want to be able to not only be understanding where you are at personally, but relationally start to connect with people in all kinds of areas, whether you have adult Sunday school classes, whether you have existing small groups or maybe no small groups whatsoever, or if you have, church leadership that you need to talk to. But what you want to find through go with them is find out, hey, this is where we're thinking about going with discipleship. Now it's time to find out what they're thinking about. So when you're looking at the lay of the land, I got some great scriptures there for you from First Peter that you can read right there. But you don't want to die on the level of language. It doesn't matter if you call them small groups, adult Sunday school, whatever you want to call the groupings of people. what's important is you know what you're trying to produce. So we don't care if it happens in an hour on Sunday morning, as long as they're trying to produce disciples. You don't care if it happens in, an hour and a half, on a Friday night. You just want to make sure that, they understand that it doesn't matter what we call it, but it does matter what we produce. Another thing right there is you want to get a key opinion leader to find out, where they're going and what they're thinking about this. So you can know where the bumps are going to be when you start to roll this out. Like I said, you want to have all kinds of calls with people. You want to engage with them in a special way so that you can see how you can build relational capital to understand where your leadership is at in this area of discipleship. Because before you launch it, you want to make sure that you have the buy-in of those leaders all across your children's, your students, and your adults, because you want to find out what are some unintended consequences that you may or may not be thinking about that they could help you out with. So get to know the terrain that's in front of you or the lay of the land.
I like one of your bullet points there under that point. It says, "Honor the past. They got you there. You have a job because of them."
Because you're always building on the shoulders of other people.
Right.
And so don't try and tear them down, but be grateful for them.
Great
Good
stuff.
point. Yeah.
Okay, number 3, who will run point? This one's in the form of a question. Who will run point? Tell us about that.
Yeah. And the bottom line is when you start a small group ministry, there's got to be someone that is passionate about it. And when you're looking for a leader for your small group ministry, think through two words: capability and availability. So first off, are they capable? Do they have passion? The small group network, we have all the resources to train your small group point person. You don't have to worry about what to train them. But what we can't train is we can't train passion, and we can't train their ability to say, I'm excited about this ministry. So capability is one piece, but the other thing is availability. I remember there's a number of people I was recruiting early on at Saddleback that they had the capability, but they just didn't have the margin in their life because they had young families or they had new jobs they were doing. And so when you're looking for the small group point person, I would say the number one thing you want to look at is passion. There's in First Peter 5, it talks about the three qualities of a shepherd. Some are overseers, some are shepherds, and some are elders. And those aren't three different people; those are the same people all wrapped up into they have different giftings. But it doesn't matter what their primary gifting is, whether it's shepherding or whether it's overseeing or whether it's elders. But what does matter is, do they have the passion? And once you can get somebody with the passion there, then we have all the abilities to help train them in any way we can. But you do have to have someone who's the point, because you as the senior person, you don't have the space to work through this. And the other thing I would encourage you, they don't have to be paid. There's a lot of people. I have people on our staff who are helping to manage our small groups that they're volunteers, but they're passionate about it and they're volunteering their time because they just love what God is doing in their life.
I also like that point on availability versus capability. And that what you shared there could go for leaders that you're recruiting anywhere in the churches.
It's true.
And they might be capable, but are they available? Well, can they do anything with the margin? So great point. Okay, number 4, who's on the team? Another question. Who's on the team?
Yeah. And this is for your small group point person. And I would encourage you that if you've identified somebody, we would love to, put our arms around them and help them out, because what they need to do is they need to develop two types of teams. One is doing a strategic team. And this would be like 1, 2, maybe 3 people that will help them architect the small group ministry. And you can actually walk through my book, Planning Small Groups with Purpose, because we'll walk them through 20 questions that they'll need to answer and to build a strategic plan on. That's one grouping of people. But there's also a grouping of people that are shepherds, and these are people who will care for your groups. Now, depending on how the size of your church is, will depend if this team is even necessary or not. But if you're running 10 or fewer small groups, probably the person who's running point, they can be this team in and of themselves. So they would need the strategic team to help them guide where the small group ministry is going, but they can do most of the shepherding. But if it grows beyond 10 small groups, then they're going to need to enlist this other part of the team, which some churches call coaches, some we call them community leaders. There's many different terms you can use. But the point is that you want to be able to have teams of people that are working with this point person to help them develop the small group ministry that you want.
There you got it. Who's on the team? Which sets up number 5. What will be your strategy? Talk to us about strategies.
So what we mean in this point is that, once you know where you're headed and you've gotten buy-in from all the church leadership, and then you know who's running point and they're working on teams to help go with that, then you got to start developing a strategy for saying, you know, how do we want to launch small groups? And what I would encourage you is in the notes right here, we talk about, the senior pastor buy-in that, is the pastor who is the head. Do you buy what you sell? One of the things that helped me the most was Rick was in a small group. Andy is in a small group. And, if the senior leader's not buying what they're selling, it's going to be a hard sell. And I know lots of pastors say, well, I'm in a small group with other senior pastors who are around the community. And that's kind of a cop out, to be honest with you, because it's a social club is what it is. It's not working on discipleship. But, the beautiful thing is Rick had 4 couples. They were all his friends and they did life together. And in the same way, that's a key part of the strategy is that do you have the seniors pastors buy-in? But the other thing is that, if you have that senior pastor buy-in, then your strategy can be a church-wide campaign. And again, I'm just going to encourage you to do some research to find out about a church-wide campaign. I wrote a book called Small Groups with Purpose. And in chapter 17, I talk about a church-wide campaign and how your church can unleash exponential power by doing this strategy to launch your small groups. Uh, if you're a senior pastor, and you don't have buy-in, you might want to do a connection strategy. And same book, Small Groups with Purpose, in chapter 16, I talk about that strategy. You may have adult Sunday schools. And in chapter 15, I talk about that strategy. The point is there's multiple strategies depending on the buy-in of your church. But the point is that you've got to latch onto a strategy for launching groups inside your church. I mean, you can spend these points, these 4 points previous trying to get everything lined up to know where you're headed, and you've worked through the leadership and you've identified a point person and they've developed a team and and you go into the strategy phase. If you don't get into the strategy phase, the rubber's never hitting the road. There's no action taking place. So I'd encourage you, learn a strategy based on where your senior pastor is and then implement it to its fullest power. And again, we have plenty of resources on each one of these strategies. So you can figure out, okay, how am I going to make this happen in the way it needs to happen?
And so once you've got your strategy dialed in, like Steve just laid out, then that sets up point number 6. When will you start?
And this is where you're drawing a line in the sand. And this is and part of this goes hand in hand with the previous point, because you can't implement a strategy without having a starting point. And the only way to do each strategy effectively is to be able to know when you want to launch groups, because then you have to back up on all the pieces to make this group strategy really important. But the main point that I have with this is I spend a lot of time talking with churches that will talk so much about, wanting to start small groups and wanting to start small groups and wanting to start small groups. And we'll do some of the things that are involved, but then we'll never take this final step of saying, hey, I want to start with a starting point. I want to take it and I'm going to draw a line in the sand, and I'm going to make sure that our church is going to do it. It may work, it may not work, but I'm not going to let that scare me, because what I'm going to do is make sure that I have things in place.
Well stated. Just gotta get that calendar out and pick that date and go for it.
Yep.
Number 7, what's your head guardrail?
Yeah. We're going to talk about two different guardrails here. And again, I encourage you to get into the show notes so you can kind of look at some of the diagrams that we put in here. But the two, and Derek, I'm going to take both point 7 and 8 here, right here, because there's a head guardrail and there's a heart guardrail. And what is important in starting a small group ministry is that you develop the end in mind and you have this pathway you want to take groups on. And what's important is that you have guardrails on this journey to get to the end in mind of discipleship. For us, it's balancing the 5 purposes inside the person, inside the group. That's where we want to get to. But we have 2 guardrails that help, reinforce that people stay on the line. If you've ever bowled, and for those of you that aren't familiar with bowling, you may want to, search on that. But, when we took our kids bowling when they were little, they put up these bumper guards. And that ensured that the bowling ball would eventually get down to the pins because the guard rails would not let the bowling ball go in the gutter. And in the same way, these 2 points, point 7 and point 8, is that you need a head guardrail and you need a heart guardrail. In the head guardrail, what we're talking about is 3 primary things. Leader training, which you'll see the graphic there in the show notes. We're talking about a curriculum pathway, and we're talking about tools. And in the leader training, the reason why the end in mind is so important is because you can't design leader training, if you don't know what you're training to. You can't design a curriculum pathway if you don't know what your curriculum is pushing people to. You can't design tools like we have with our health assessment and group assessment unless you have the tools that reinforce that. So part of the head guardrail is saying, how are you cognitively engaging your people in these different things? And how are you helping develop them? Now, on the same hand, the heart guardrail is tackling 2 other things. It's people and data, because you're going to need people to help you harvest data. And data can be hard data or soft data. I want to encourage you to understand the difference. Hard data is the information you want. When does the group meet? Have they gone through leader training 1? Have they gone through leader training 2? Shoot. Have they done our host training, which is before leader training 1? Do we know the curriculum they're studying? Do we know, is their group open or is it closed? The hard data is the data that you want in this particular point. Soft data is what they want to share with you. The soft data is what makes up your leaders. And I want to encourage you that people who work in your small group ministry have to become friends with small group leaders before you can train them in leadership and before you can help coach them to where they need to go. Because without a friendship base, what happens is it becomes very sterile training. And we want our training to be very organic. And if you think through in a family system, the more relational you are with your children, the more you can help get them to where you want them to be. And so in the heart guardrail, you want people to build friendships with your small group leaders through understanding what's their soft data. And soft data can just be simple things like, what's their spouse's name? What's their kids' names? When are the birthdays? When are the anniversaries? Because you want to engage them on those touch points. What are their hobbies that they enjoy? What are the passions that they do? What do they do for a living? What do they do with free time? What are hobbies that they have? Soft data gives you the ability to speak into and get the hard data that you want. The other thing about data that I would say is don't get data that you're not going to use. And so if you just want to make sure that when you're talking through groups and when you're looking at these 2 points in point 7 and point 8, is that you want to make sure that you understand, all the aspects of what you're wanting to grab data for. And again, that's just a little exercise you can do. Don't grab data if you're not going to use it, is the bottom line. The other thing that you're going to see in this graphic that is in point number 8 about the heart guardrail is that it takes a village to raise a good small group leader. And you're going to see all kinds of things in the graphic there that impact a small group leader. Here's the question you need to ask. Are they all saying the same thing? And what's the same thing? Go back to point number 1. Where are you headed? Because where you are headed that you talked about in point 1 is the very thing this village of people and resources, both people and processes, are engaging your small group leaders on. Super important that you understand what that's all about. So 2 points really quick: head guardrail, heart guardrail, super important to have if you're going to start a small group ministry.
And those two guardrails, the head and the heart, set up point number 9, which is don't stand alone.
Yeah. And this is something I would say that's going to be super important for you who, if you're listening to this, you're the senior leader of your church and you're going to be recruiting a volunteer, or maybe you're a volunteer and saying, hey, my senior leader just said, this is what I've got to do. And you're trying to figure out what, what is it you're trying to do? You know, we don't want you to stand alone. And one of the reasons why we have the small group network is that just like in parenting, sometimes being around other peers. I remember some of the things that we loved the most, Lisa and I did when we were raising our kids, is being with other families that had kids our age, because we knew we were not going crazy. We're not the only ones dealing with this. And one of the things that this point is all talking about is get involved with the small group network. We have what we call circles of other small group point people all around the world that are connecting people to peer learnings so that you can get to know people who are going through things just like you in the same size of churches that you have in the same geographical regions so that you can be together. The other thing we have is that we have a number of resources that are for free at the small group network. We have things you can buy and courses you can take, but we have, over 800 to 900 articles on the small group network that can help you feel like, hey, I'm not alone. I'm getting resources that can help me out. We also have a Facebook group that can help you that we have over 15,000 small group point people involved in so that you can ask questions. But more importantly, on the Facebook group, just search it. Any questions been asked over the last decade, and you can see the threads that are there. So don't stand alone. There's some great things that you'll learn about the small group network in this point, but it's just a shame if you try to do this on your own. It's like if you try to do life on your own, and God never designed us to do anything in solo and on our own.
I couldn't agree more. If you are a small group point person, definitely go to smallgroupnetwork.com. And I think it's /huddles and get in a huddle. And there's nothing like having coffee with some other people that lead groups in their church and just encouraging one another, sharing stories, and stealing each other's best ideas. So that sets up number 10. Last but not least, prepare your heart.
Yeah, and I know Derek knows this. It's actually smallgroup.com/circles. Huddles will get you there too, but the new term that we rolled out about a couple months ago, it's still so hard for even for me because I'm so for over since '07 since we started the network, we were calling them huddles, and so
It's your
it
fault.
just
You
doesn't
you
roll off the
you and
tongue
you
sometimes.
ingrained it into my memory. Huddles, huddles, huddles.
I know. Mine too. Number 10 though is talks about prepare your heart. And this is what I would say to anybody who is running point on this ministry is that where your heart is where you will be. And it's a point of being able to saying, the thing I would tell you the most is, are you called with passion to this ministry? If you are, God will equip you. God never calls the equip. He always equips the call. And so if you're called, just like the disciples, I get such reverence in the disciples being picked because they weren't the pretty people of Jerusalem. They weren't the most educated people of Jerusalem. They weren't the who's who of Jerusalem. They weren't the movers and shakers of Jerusalem. They weren't even the most biblically literate people of the day who would have been the Pharisees and Sadducees. Jesus picked the people who are willing to go on the journey. Now, with that, because you're listening to this, you probably have already are fully bought in. But what I will say, if you want to last the long haul, you've got to take care of your soul. And part of what I encourage you to do is start to, think through, is my quiet time rock solid? Am I reading God's word? Am I tithing to my church so that, God knows that, he's more important than my finances? Am I in a small group myself? Am I buying what I sell? Am I in a small group? Because one of the things of taking care of your heart is your soul care. And I just want to encourage you. I've been in ministry long enough, since 1982, before Derek was probably born. That's painful. But I've been in ministry long enough to know that there are people who make it the long haul and there are people who don't. And probably those that don't, it's because they've let their soul care drift off. And nobody gets into a bad situation with a backhoe. It's always a spoon. And the devil's got all the time in the world, and he'll let there be a slow erosion happening in your moral life if you're not careful. So take care of your heart. And again, we at the Small Group Network are here for you to help you. These last 2 points, we don't want you to go it alone, and we don't want you to bankrupt your own soul care. And especially, you don't want to sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. So there's all kinds of balances you got to keep in place if you're going to last the long haul, because this is a marathon. Small group ministry, I've been doing it at Saddleback now. At the recording of this podcast, I'm in my 27th year of being at Saddleback, working on the small group ministry. It's never done. You might do some things that, you're done with some things like a church-wide campaign or a training or things like that, but it's just never finished. And so you want to make sure you're going to last the long haul. So these last 2 points, super important for you. Don't be alone and take care of your heart. But probably they're the 2 most important points. I know the first 8 were all tactical on how you can build a small group ministry, but the last 2 will make sure you do it for the long haul. So I hope you'll take time to dig into the show notes, kind of look through the verses, look through some of the words we put on the page so you can understand those points. And if there's something you don't understand, we're here to help you. And if there's a way that you want to contribute into helping each other, jump into a circle there with the Small Group Network. But the point is, these 10 things, I will tell you without a doubt, having done small group ministry over 35 years, these 10 things are a must to do. If you don't do these, it will not be built as solid as you want. So dig into them. If you have questions, you can ping me. My cell, my email, all my at whoever, whatever social media, it's all out there. So there's no excuse why you can't engage with us or me. So use these 10 things.
And there it is, the 10 keys on how to start a small group ministry. We really hope this episode encouraged you and equipped you to do just this, to launch a group, or if you already have a group ministry at your church, we hope this helps you to take yours to the next level. And fall is coming quick. Summer is almost here, so get planning now. And again, keep the main thing, and that's changing lives and discipling people.
All right.
Steve, any final words?
No, I think, again, just know we're out here, review those 10 things. And Derek, I love what you said. If you've got an existing small group ministry, which of these 10 are you strong in? Which ones do you need to work on? It's a good template. So touche, my friend.
There you go. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, we'll see you later. Goodbye.
See you later, guys.